Thanks for taking your time. I've been listening to all of the albums since you sent them to me.
Good
That
heavens.
was so I've got a bit of a headache now. I have to.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I was thinking, so of course I've been to your website and there's a lot of information there. So I was thinking maybe the angle here could be that we actually go through the history of the band through
Yep.
these different albums,
Yep.
because they kind of commemorate different stages of your development. So I was
That's
thinking
right.
maybe that's one way to do it, maybe. So
We tried to keep them in as chronological order as we could. It wasn't in 100%, but we did the best we could. It's pretty much.
Yeah, and of course you have this jam on the first LP there, which is kind of a little bit out of order. But so if we so maybe, I mean, I did also, there is an interview with you on radio, local radio there. I listened to that one a bit. So if we miss something, is it okay if I steal a quote or two from that one, just in case?
Yeah, whatever you need to do.
Yeah. But anyway, so if we go. So by the way, so maybe I should introduce myself. I'm Swedish.
Yeah.
I used to work. I lived in Japan for many years, and I used to work for. I had a record company actually in Japan as well, a reissue label, Strange Days, and we also had one of the premier magazines in Japan. I used to write a lot of articles there, so I've interviewed all the big names from the 70s there, and now I'm doing articles for Shindig Magazine. And so it's not my main job, but I'm a music buff, if you will. So I do proper work. I will do.
Sure.
I promise you, I'll put in a lot more work than a normal journalist would do in order to get this to be fairly decent. So I'll spend a lot of time on this. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. No.
So if we start with the first then, Volume 1, which is the live 1969 part there, and sort of the events leading up to that first live recording. So if you back the band to wherever you feel you would like to start to talk about Dark, then, so to speak.
Well, first of all, that is the very first lineup of Dark there was. Yeah. And until earlier this year, when I was going through all my old tapes, I didn't realise I had surviving a recording of the very first lineup. So I was really pleased when I found that. But yeah, I formed the band while I was at school in 1968 with a couple of schoolmates. Bruce Duncan on bass guitar and Charlie Hyams on drums, although he was actually the second drummer. The first drummer we had was just somebody we knew was in the Boys Brigade, and he used to go up and down the streets on a Sunday with the rest of the Boys Brigade, and he would bang a snare. So we thought, oh, he knows how to play the drums, so we'll get him in. Unfortunately, he wasn't that good. I had managed to assemble a very cheap and nasty drum kit, basically by buying anything I could find, a snare drum here, a tom-tom there, a cymbal somewhere else. And so it wasn't a very good kit, and that probably didn't help him, but we decided he wasn't going to work. So we just asked a few friends if they would be interested in joining us and playing drums. We couldn't find anybody that knew how to play drums, so we asked Charlie, and he said, yeah, I'll give it a go. But until then, he'd never even held a drumstick. Okay. But he turned out to have quite a natural knack for it. And I mean, some of the times I've been listening to these recordings, some of them for the first time in many years, I've been quite astounded as to how good he actually became quite quickly.
So, how old were you in 68, by the way?
68, I would have turned 15 in March.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, we're all still at school. We didn't leave school for another 3 years. Most of those, if not all of those early live recordings would have been recorded while we were still at school.
Yeah. So 15, I think I read or heard somewhere that that's the year when you got an electric guitar as a birthday gift. Wasn't that 15?
My first guitar was for Christmas in 1965.
Yeah.
And Dad brought them. I'd let them know that I wanted a guitar, and so they gave me one for Christmas. And I was expecting, because that was what was in my head, I was expecting I would be getting an electric guitar, but I
you didn't.
Yeah. And so I was a bit disappointed with that, expecting an electric one, but I persevered with it. They bought it for me. And I got on okay. I taught myself. The only problem with it was I have quite small hands for a guitarist, so I struggled a little bit with the wider fretboard that the Spanish style acoustics have. So I set up a persistent campaign with Mum and Dad during that the first half of 1966 to get me an electric guitar, because I knew that the fretboards were a bit narrower, and they eventually relented and recruited a family friend who they knew played guitar, and he took me to a local music store to choose a suitable electric guitar for me, and that's how that came about in October of that year. 66.
So that was in 66. So you'd been playing the electric guitar for 2 years when you formed the band, so to speak, then?
Yeah, probably, yeah. I mean, obviously at that stage I wasn't very good. I used to learn things like something that the Beatles used to play, and some very simple Hank Marvin type things I used to just play along. And then as time went on, later 66, 67, I discovered Eric Clapton and Cream. And then probably in 68, I discovered Hendrix. And that made me realise I wanted to play lead guitar rather than just strum around in the background. So I started teaching myself lead guitar, just basically trial and error. And, just worked out what notes fitted in what key and how I could play them. And I just played and played and played and jammed along to blues type records, and developing my own style, basically. I didn't copy anybody, but I used people like Clapton and Hendrix, etc., as inspiration. So my style developed naturally, it evolved naturally, rather than me copying anybody's style. And I didn't actually realise at the time I was doing that, but thinking back, I'm glad I did it that way now, rather than trying to physically copy somebody note for note.
It's probably good. So then you had the band, and this recording was made. Do you remember anything about the circumstances around the recording of the first live session that's on LP1?
Not that specific one. As I said, I'd actually forgotten that I'd recorded that, but obviously I can remember subsequent similar sessions. We used to just ask local churches if their church rooms were available for playing in, and that's what most of our initial gigs were, playing up in a church hall on their stage. And I can't remember now how I acquired it, but I had a fairly good tape deck, a Revox G36, but I didn't have any microphones for it, so I just bought a couple of very cheap generic plastic mics that I could plug in to record, and that's probably partly why the original recordings aren't that good quality wise. Not some tape deck, but the microphones that were recorded through them. So that's how we would have set up that very first gig. We would have asked a local church hall if we could use their church rooms for a gig, and obviously we put the word around to all our friends that were at school and asked them to bring their friends along, and we actually used to get it used to be quite well attended, these early gigs, and I think you can hear that on some of the applause that we get. So they're very appreciated, and we enjoyed it, of course.
Not all that Christian, I would say, but fair enough. So one of the tracks on that first LP, Sky Blues, is something that comes that returns a couple of times, I think, through the. So that's what.
Well, we didn't have a very big repertoire. Bruce wrote most of the songs that we self-penned, and obviously we did a few covers. So because we recorded 2 or 3 gigs in fairly quick succession over those 69 and 70, obviously they contain the same songs. So you've got This House, I think, comes up 2 or 3 times, and Sky Blues comes up a couple of times.
So then the next 2 LPs, as you say, then they are from 1970. Miss Towers is there as well. You're right. 1970, and that's Mark II of the band. Then, so could you talk about that era and those 2 LPs a little bit? I also realized that that's the first time that Maypole appears on a recording there. So one of your earliest songs.
Probably one of, if not the first recording I actually composed. Sometime during late 69 or early 70, I can't remember exactly when, we came across a keyboard player, Martin Maloney, so we asked him if he'd be interested in joining, which he did. So that became Dark Mark II. So we were a 4-piece then. And again, we just, rehearsed and then asked church halls if we could set up a gig, which they allowed us to. So that's where the second and third volumes come from. I think they were all from one gig, but I can't be certain now. But they were all on one tape, so quite likely. But there were so many of those recordings, and some of the recordings tend to get a bit self-indulgent. We go off on a tangent into a jam, so they tend to be a bit. So that's why that's spread over 2 albums. Although the very first track, which initially I didn't recognise, it got called Cloud of Unknowing, I think, by the label that first put that out on CD. But on listening to it over the last year or so, I've suddenly realised that actually wasn't a live recording. It was done in the cellar under my dad's shop where we rehearse all the time, and it's another Bruce Duncan composition, and it was called There's No Need to Shout. And knowing that, the vocals are very garbled, you can't really hear it, but if you know that is the title and you listen to the vocals, you can actually understand that Bruce is singing now and again, There's No Need to Shout.
Okay, but you've kept the Cloud of Unknowing as the title for this reissue.
Title,
okay. So you meant.
So that is how it was known, because that was released on a CD soon after the very first official Dark Round the Edges CD was released. So people will know it. So I decided to keep that title. Yeah,
but it's also still marked as a live recording here in us, but it isn't actually. It's a rehearsal recording instead. Then so it's live.
Yeah. Although it was on that very first CD, it was all those tracks were marked down as a live recording. Well, I think there was only 2 that we called a live recording. The rest were studio recordings, which I think they eventually released on an LP called Artifacts from the Black Museum.
Yeah, I've got that one actually. You mentioned the rehearsal room, and I understand it was, like you said, under your dad's Photoshop.
It was
and it was, as I understand, very damp. How much time did you spend there, and how sick did you get from being there all the time? I wonder.
No, well, personally, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I eventually cured the damp as best I could, which wasn't that successful. But I painted the back wall white, and then I put up the name of the band Dark in very large orange letters, and I strung fairy lights all around it to make it look pretty. And no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And we obviously, being a new band, we wanted to rehearse as much as possible. So we probably went down there at least once a week. And it did smell a bit. And we came out, our clothes would reek of the damp smell, which didn't upset our parents too much, I'm sure, at the time. But no, we thought it was a thoroughly enjoyable time.
You mentioned putting up the Dark name. So were you actually were called Dark from the very start of this band?
From the very first time I decided to form a band, obviously I had to come up with a name. So I was thinking of all sorts of things. And then one day I was reading a magazine, a weekly periodical, and a picture was in that of a French actress called Mireille Dark. But her surname was spelt D-A-R-C. Unfortunately, she's now passed away, but I thought, Dark, that's a great name for a band. So I thought I went with that, obviously just changing it back to the traditional spelling of the word.
So it was from a magazine. I thought maybe you'd been watching Casino Royale, the first James Bond movie, because she's in that one, actually. I think.
Oh, is she? I must check that out again. Is that the one with Niven in?
Sorry?
Is that the one with David Niven in as James Bond?
Yes, right. That's right. That's right.
Right.
The first version of, because they did a remake of Casino Royale. But the first one with David Niven, that's the one she's in. Yeah.
I must check that out. Yeah. No, that I didn't realise that at the time. No, it was just purely this black and white picture in the it was called the Weekend magazine, although it actually came out on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to have it every week, and just that one, just as at the time I was trying to decide on a name, I saw that picture and I thought, Dark.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good name. I think so. So since we speak about the name, I think actually the name has been a major part in you achieving cult status over the years, actually, because it's
could well be right. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I mean your music is also quite, you know, ambivalent and brooding. I mean the lyrics are ambivalent and it's brooding, so it becomes this sort of, it doesn't age because you know you had, you know, after punk you had this sort of bad time music stuff, Joy Division and so on. And I mean we had these waves of sort of dark music, you know. So it's a very, yeah, maybe, yeah. Do you agree with that, by the way, or do you have another theory?
It amazes me even today that how much interest there is still in that music from that time. I mean, I even get messages from young lads that are still in school saying how much they enjoy the music. Yes, from all over the world, from Brazil, I've had them, from Japan, Australia. You know, they message me and say how much they enjoy the music, and it just amazes me.
Do you know why? Why do they enjoy it? What's the attraction?
Well, I think you touched upon it. It is, in some ways, it's a bit ageless.
Mm.
It doesn't really have a period to it, or even to some extent a genre. We often struggled to pigeonhole what type of music it was. We were always asked that. What sort of music do you play? And at the time, the main term was either underground or progressive, and so we basically those terms, and then eventually people came up with the term psychedelic, garage, that sort of thing. But I mean, I never actually classed it myself because it was my music, and it just evolved with me and the band, and how we matured as we played over the first 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So no, it wasn't. It was a style I actually aspired to play. It was just the way it came out as we played.
Yeah. I suppose we're jumping a bit ahead there, but I think so. Another thing about that. So I mean the Dark Around the Edges album. It's very simple in the sense that it's not really produced. I mean it's recorded, but there's not a lot of sort of overdubs and stuff. And so the music is fairly sort of. It's not a live album, but you have this sort of feeling of directness in the recording, if you see what I mean. At the same time, even though that's very basic, the music is actually quite complex. So there's a kind of a strange tension between the recording and the ambition of the music somehow. I think that is quite interesting to me. If you see what I mean, it's rather progressive, if you put it like that, in terms of style, but the recording is not. It doesn't sound like Yes at all, for example, you know.
No. I mean, the reason it probably has a sort of a fairly live sound to it is because we weren't multi-track recording it. We had to record a stereo backing track.
Yeah.
And had to all get it right together at the same time.
Yes.
So basically, the backing tracks are live.
Yeah.
And then just over the vocals and another guitar part here and there. So that's how probably the live feel comes around.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't feel so to me when you say garage, for example. It's sort of primitive recorded, but the music is also primitive. But the thing here is, I think there's a tension between the primitiveness of the recording, not in a bad way. I mean, it's good sounding, but primitive. But then you have this sort of relatively advanced stuff that you're doing, if you see what I mean. So it doesn't match, and that creates a unique feeling in a way somehow.
Well, I suppose we were actually still rather immature to some extent. Although Ron joined a few months before the album, and he had quite a background in music, because he was in I think it was his dad's band or his uncle's band, I can't remember now, but they played all sort of middle of the road cover songs, but he developed quite an understanding of the bass guitar during that period. Then Martin joined, and he'd had his own band, Wicked Lady, of course, for quite some time, so he was well versed in everything. And Clive, he was probably the only one of us that had traditional tuition on the drums, so he was very well set up, and it all just gelled together. Or having said that, I never classed it as garage. I've never heard that term until the last 2 or 3 years, actually. So that other people have called it, but I never understood what that meant. So I've gone along with it. But I tend to stick with prog rock, psychedelic prog rock.
Yeah, something like that. So we're jumping a bit ahead there. So if we go back to the order of the LPs here, then so after the live 2 live LPs there, there's a studio on volume 4. Then it's still Mark II in the studio, and then Mark III in the studio. So could you talk about that and the transition? So this was the first time you were kind of officially, at least in this list, doing studio recordings.
Yeah, that's right. That was the very first recording session we did at SIS Studios, and that was in April 1970. That I think all the tracks on that LP, bar the last one, they were recorded on that session, and they were all my compositions, and they were recorded live, no overdubs. So the vocals are sung at the same time, and you can hear we had some guests there. I think it was some girlfriends there in the studio, and you can hear them clapping along at some stages. But the last track, Prime Eat Eating, that was done the following year, probably during March. I'm not 100% sure, but that was after Bruce and Charlie had left, and replaced them with Carl Bush on bass guitar and Clive Thornycroft on drums. And that track came about because somehow a local photographer that I knew, obviously being a photographer myself, I knew him, Richard Cobby, but he was also a classical guitar tutor. He had been commissioned by this company, Primate, to compose and get recorded a song for their company to play on their stand at the 1971 Ideal Home exhibition in London. So knowing that I had a band, he said, "Do you fancy doing this?" So yeah, I said, "Why not?" So he gave us the song to practice, and then one Sunday afternoon we trooped into SIS again, and that afternoon we laid it down. So there was myself on guitar, the 2 new guys, Carl Bush on bass, Clive Thornycroft on drums, and Martin Maloney on keyboards was still with us at that point. I think he left soon after that. I don't think that was the reason he left, but it was soon after that he left. So that was probably basically the last time we recorded with Martin as a 4-piece.
So that was actually a song that was commissioned in a way, and they actually used it, and they used it actually on their stand and in the exhibition.
Well, that was the idea. How much they used it, I don't know, because I actually went down to the Ideal Home exhibition while it was running, expecting to hear it blaring out over the speakers. And I was saying, "Oh, we played that," but I couldn't hear anything at all. So we just trooped all around the concourse trying to find the stand, and we eventually found this little stand with one guy standing there. And I went up to him and I told him who I was and why we were there. And he said, "Oh, you recorded that, did you?" And I said, "Yeah." So he went to this cupboard, he opened the cupboard and got out this little cassette deck with a cassette tape in it, and he played it, and I had to get really close to it so I could hear it. And I said, "Yeah, that's us." So that was until we supported Status Quo, that was the height of our fame. A little cupboard on a small stand at the Ideal Home exhibition, March 1971.
So the Ideal Home didn't really have a very big loudspeaker in it, I suppose. Then,
not on that stand. No, whether it was played on another day, I don't know. But we didn't hang around to find out.
Okay, moving on to the next LP. Then you're fully into a new setup, I suppose, with Mark IV of the band, I suppose, there with LP number 5 and cellar rehearsals for that setting.
That was after Martin Maloney left on keyboard, so we were back to a 3-piece. And I used to record a lot of our rehearsals, but most of those were probably rehearsing for the second session we did at SIS in October of that year. I think we did most of those tracks we actually put on that session. I think there's possibly one or two we didn't actually use, but most of them were there. And I think there was a couple of covers as well. There was a Cream cover, Crossroads, and a Blind Faith cover, Do What You Like.
Yeah, they're there. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and also I think one of the songs there, in the Sky, is kind of first time that appears. I think on.
It is. I remember when I wrote that, but it wouldn't have been long before that. There's two versions of it on that LP because. Not long ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I found a video copy of a cine film that I'd recorded in the cellar of us. I'd completely forgotten about it. And on that was a sound with the audio that had obviously been overdubbed. And I thought it was a different recording because it was so out of sync with the cine film on the video. Yeah. But eventually I realised it wasn't, and then I remembered that I remembered actually copying it to video myself, and because I'd actually got the cine film and then a tape of the audio completely separate, I had to try and sync them as best I could. And doing the way I tried to achieve that, I had a cine projector with a variable speed to it. So I ran the cine film to copy onto video and then recorded the audio at the same time, adjusting the speed of the cine as it went to try and get it in sync. It wasn't very successful. But having found that video, I sent it off to get it high quality, high definition scanned. Like absolutely immaculate. I couldn't believe how good the quality was. But in having that, and then I had the actual recording, it was a lot easier to adjust the video. I could actually do a bit, cut it, shift it about a little bit until the audio was almost perfectly in sync with the video. So that is why I've kept that version and put it on the LP. But there is also another version of the same track, which would have been rehearsed previous to the October 71 session. So that would have been in preparation for that. That would have been a rehearsal for that session. So that's why there's because of that on that LP.
There is a film, it's video, a cine film video on your website, I think, but it's not very high quality. So does that video appear anywhere? The video you're talking about now, I wonder if it's high quality kind of video.
It's with my YouTube channel.
Okay, I need to go in and look there then. Okay,
I can't remember now. If I've not put that on the website, I can't understand why I haven't. But before I got it HD scanned, I did put the original video on YouTube. So there's two versions of it.
Okay, maybe that's the first one I saw. Maybe then.
Could be. You would have seen the first one. Is the video quality isn't as good, and the syncing isn't quite as good either. No. But if you look through my YouTube channel to find the one that says in the Sky HD scanned version.
Yeah, I'll try to find that one. Yeah. So then you have you then took those cellar rehearsals into the studio on disc number 6, and that's when I think there's a major leap in overall sort of performance as well on those studio rehearsals there, or the studio sessions, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, we'd been sort of 18 months since the first recording session we did. And we got new a new lineup, and we were motoring along. We were quite happy with how we were progressing, and I was quite happy with how things were going. So it did show the difference between those two recording sessions, how much we had improved in that time.
And there's also, I'm not sure if this is the first place, Maypole is still there, of course, but then RC8, I think, appears here maybe for the first time.
Yeah, again, that would have been written in a similar time frame to In the Sky. and could have sworn and wasting your time. Probably a bit before that, but probably would have been written sometime during 71. Yes.
So what does RC8 mean, actually?
It doesn't mean anything. I just wanted to have a slightly different slant to the song, and the reason I wanted RC8 is because the first 3 words of the song are "I see hate," so I don't want to put that. I don't want to put. I want to make it sound a bit different. So I said RC8 floating down. So I went with RC8.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from.
I see.
It's also why on the original Dark Round the Edges label, the title of that is RC8, and then in brackets I see hate.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I realized that we have been talking for half an hour already. I should say that this session will end automatically after 40 minutes. So once it cuts off, just log in on the same link again. You can just restart it again if it happens. So it will abruptly cut us off, but we just log back in again. Sorry about that. I don't have the
That's all right.
pro version of
do exactly what I've done this time. And
yeah, exactly the same. So do you remember anything about any specifics from these recording sessions then that you were doing in the SIS studio this time round? Any specifics?
I don't, unfortunately, no. I mean, I can the very first recording session with Dark Mark II. I can remember playing some of the songs. I can remember the girls being in the studio clapping along. Anything specific, I don't remember. Likewise with the second one in October 71. I've got very limited, if any, memory of that recording session at all, which is such a shame. But I think the next LP, there is the backing tracks of that recording session.
Yeah.
And in placing on that, you can hear a little bit of banter, but not much in between us.
Yeah.
In between the tracks. And that brought back slight memories. But again, unfortunately, nothing actually specific that springs to mind at all. So long ago, too old.
Yes. Yeah, it's very long. So actually, when you talk about the instrumental sessions, so both Volume 7 and Volume 8 are sort of instrumental sessions, but I'm wondering, are they from the same time, or is Volume 7 from 71 with instrumental sessions, and then Volume 8 being the Round the Edges instrumental sessions from 72 then? So are there two different? Okay. So why were you doing or so Volume 7 with the instrumental sessions, that's actually the same time as you were doing the Volume 6 studio parts then? Is that from the same recording sessions then, those two LPs?
I'm losing track of what we're talking about now. Volume 7 is tracks to the October 71. Is it?
Okay.
Yeah, so Volume 6 is the actual finished tracks.
Yes, from October 71, and Volume 7 is the backing session. Right.
It's the backing sessions, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because I don't think there was a year on Volume 7, so I was unsure where that actually came into the. Okay, right. I see. Yeah. Okay. So then moving into then we come into the Round the Edges sessions and LPs, of course. Then, so I hear on the sessions of the Round the Edges, you can still hear you were still doing some guide vocals there. So that's basically, right. you were playing live in the studio, just sort of guitar, drum, and bass. But you were singing at the time, because always when you were playing live, I suppose everyone was used to hearing your vocals as well as way to knowing where they were. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's only one guitar, that was me, and then there's bass.
Okay, it's maybe one guitar.
Well, on the backing tracks you're talking about, yeah. I wanted to. I didn't want to sing live because I wanted to concentrate more on the vocals later. So I said I just want to sing a guide vocal so that they can hear where we are and they can change tack where necessary. I didn't realise that the mics on the amps were going to pick up my vocal. Unfortunately, they did. But that, I think actually on RC8 they come over quite clearly, so you could use that as a live track. But on the others, they come in and out. But I didn't intend them to be hearable on those tracks. But that's how it came about. Yeah.
And of course
I just overdubbed the actual vocals on there. Well, I think in Maypole I got slightly adrift on the last verse. I think I came in a couple of bars too late, so you can actually hear a pre-echo, if you like, of the guide vocal behind, in front of my actual vocal.
Yeah. So it's almost like your vocals are always being slightly double tracked in that sense, I suppose, on the actual.
Turned out that way, not intentional, but it turned out that way. Yeah.
So then if we look into the actual songs on around the edges a little bit, so I mean the opening track, that Dark Side, I was just thinking, I mean, what if you had called that Dark Side of the Moon?
I know. I mean, I did get in there first with the actual lyric before Pink
exactly.
Floyd. But
yes.
If I'd have called it Dark Side of the Moon, yeah, that would have been one up to me, definitely. Yeah.
So lyrically, it seems to be sort of these sort of very huge time span somehow. A turtle's your chariot and time is your man. That sounds very sort of big sci-fi concept.
Yeah, there was no real idea behind those. It's just, I mean, I was used to hearing songs from, like Tales of Brave Ulysses from Cream and that sort of thing. And I thought, I just want to put some sort of lyric in along those sort of lines. So I just let my mind wander, if you like, and just to some extent, the first thing that came into my head, I just write the lyrics down and just let it flow from there. There's no real plan. There was no real reasoning behind the lyrics. It's just, I just wanted it to sound that way, a little bit dreamy, a little bit out there, rather than a traditional song about a girlfriend, that sort of thing. I wanted something that's a bit different.
Yeah. So there's just like in other songs here, like in Maple, there's no real sort of theme to the lyrics. No.
That is a different story, actually, because the way I wrote the songs, I'd just mess about on the guitar and I'd come, that's a nice chord sequence. And then I'd work out, I'd hum a melody to myself, and then I'd write some words. So with Maypole, I literally wrote down the very first words that came into my head, just so that I got something to sing to it as I progressed the song. But I didn't, so I worked on the song, worked on the melody, and I took the song to rehearsal. We started playing it with those lyrics that I intended to change, but we just rehearsed it so much that they stuck. And that is actually where the title came from, Maypole. The elephants were dancing under Maypole under tree. I fully intended to change those lyrics, but I never went back and did it. So those lyrics have stuck. It's a bit like Paul McCartney when he wrote Yesterday. When he was writing, he studied scrambled eggs, that sort of thing. And then eventually he actually did change the lyrics, which is probably...
He shouldn't have done that. That's his mistake.
That would have been a totally different...
It will cut off now, I can tell you, in any second here. So
I'll log in again.
Yeah, you just log in again. Yeah. So
in a minute.
In a minute, yeah. I think it will... Yeah, here we go, I think.
Okay.
Hello there. Are you back again?
Yeah, I just need to get the video back. I'm not seeing you at the moment.
No. Okay, I need to get my video on here. You're right. So I was looking at you. I forgot to look at my own. Let's see if I can turn off my... Here we go.
We're back together again, yeah.
Irritating, but that's how the internet works, I suppose. So anyway, So Paul McCartney's Loss is where we were. But if we go back to the Dark Side, the first track there, so I'm also thinking about the way, so you have a fairly long intro, which is sort of really quite propulsive drums there in the beginning, and then it kind of is fairly lyrical, musically speaking. But then after about a minute, your voice comes in. And it's this very sort of plaintive and slightly sort of wobbly kind of it's wobbly kind of. Yeah, it's a strange voice you're singing in on that song. I think. Can you talk a little bit about the track from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I've never classed myself as a vocalist.
Yeah.
The first version of Dark, Bruce did a lot of the singing, most of the singing.
Yeah.
But of course, when he left,
Yeah.
there was no one else in the band that wanted to do it. So it's basically down to me. And I had done a bit of singing in the first version of Dark. So I said, well, okay, I'll do it. Not a problem. I've done some, so I'll just carry on. But as I said, I never really classed myself as a vocalist. I haven't done any singing training or anything. So my voice is as it is. That's how it comes across, and that's how it sounds. And a lot of people have said, having heard some of the later stuff we did recently over the last few years, how little my voice has changed in that time. So, as I say, my voice is as it is. You get what you get.
Yeah, I very much like the vocals on that track. I think that and Maypole are actually my favorite sort of vocal performances on the album, because you've got this sort of it's somehow plaintive but also wobbly somehow. It's not it's imperfect, but it fits very much with the atmosphere that you're creating on the track, I think so.
I have been compared with my vocals have been compared with quite a few other people, and on one instance Jack Bruce, which I totally disagree with, but there you go. That's other people's opinions.
Yeah, and Kissing Spell, they said they on their CD release of the album, they had something about, they were saying the Radiohead of the 70s question mark or something like that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Radiohead, but
not really, no.
And
they used to come up with those sort of descriptions, which I just let them go ahead with. It wasn't in contact with me. It was. I mean, I didn't find out about that sort of thing until I actually saw the finished product. But fine. If that's what people think, then that's great. Yeah.
The structure of Dark Side also is kind of typical, I suppose, for your track. It has sort of lyrics in the beginning, and then there's a middle section which is more sort of, it's instrumental and a bit jammy somehow. Then you come back with a lyrical section in the end. That's a fairly, it's almost, not all the songs are like that, but it's one of the sort of typical structures, it seems. Is that
it is in that one? I deliberately wanted that middle section in as it was. So I took it to rehearsal, and we all it was before Ron joined it, so we only had Carl on bass and Clive on drums. So it was basically a bit of an interplay with me and Carl to get that middle section as it was. So it was before Ron joined, but he picked it up. Being the professional he is, he picked it up, no trouble.
Yeah. So if we look at the Maple track, then again, I mean the vocals there are quite. Again, the opening is fairly soft, but your voice is even more, even sort of almost vibrato kind of
right
quality
again,
to it.
It's nothing that I rehearsed. It's just that's my voice as it was.
But it's different on other tracks. I think it's more pronounced in that direction here. So you mean to say it wasn't really, you didn't try to sound
no, I didn't put any attempt into sounding different on different tracks. It's just how I sang those tracks at that time. So no thought that went into it at all. Just trying to sing in tune and remember the words. Basically, that's how they all came about. Just me concentrating, make sure I got everything right.
And the structure here is a bit similar, that you have then an instrumental part and the lyrics, the vocal part, come back towards the end of the track. So similar kind of structure as Dark Side on that level, I suppose.
Yeah, I think probably most of the tracks are along those lines. You get the vocal at the start, then an instrumental center, and then vocals to finish, apart from Live for Today.
Yeah. But I suppose you also wanted to have that because you wanted, again, I mean, there's a lot of guitar soloing stuff going on here and there, bits and pieces.
Oh, sure.
So you wanted to have your guitar moment, so to speak. I suppose that's part of the way you made the songs.
That's what the impetus was. on basically all our tracks was the music rather than the vocal. The vocal were, if you like, a necessary evil, but I realised we had to have vocals. I didn't want to be a totally instrumental band, so I put them in because that's how I wrote the compositions.
I think the vocals are great. You should. They are fantastic, I think. So,
yeah, I appreciate it.
So Live for Today, then that sounds to me that there seems to be some kind of theme to the lyrics there. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's sort of nostalgia or sort of sadness about the short time we have on this earth, or something like that. I suppose is the simple story.
It is, yeah. The basic inspiration behind that was, at that time in the world, there was the Cold War. There was a lot of tension between Russia and the States, and we'd gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there was always that worry that something was going to develop, and the world would come to an end. Live for today. You'll find tomorrow will be gone. But funnily enough, only yesterday, on one of the groups in Facebook, a photo was posted of a class from when I was at school, although it wasn't the class I was in, but it had the biology teacher that taught me biology. I missed this, and I wrote most of the lyrics to that song during a biology lesson in one of her classes. So I was so glad to be able to see that picture, because I've not seen a photograph of her anywhere else. So that brought back nice memories of me writing lyrics to Live for Today while I was supposed to be being taught biology, but she never found out, so don't tell her.
So what were your biology grades like then?
Oh yeah, okay, acceptable.
okay. That's
yeah,
good.
nothing to write home about.
But one thing, if you were to sort of then sort of describe the lyric, I would say dark.
Sorry? Oh yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it does come across like that. Yeah, and that's probably what I intended in those lyrics.
Yeah.
Live for today, and you will find tomorrow will be gone. Yeah.
So the vocal style here is much smoother. So I mean, it's a totally different type of vocal on this one, and it's also, I think, quite obviously multi-tracked in place here. So it's a totally different way of singing compared to the previous tracks, actually.
Yeah, I did overdub the vocals twice on that. Yeah, we had the backing track, all the instruments, and I overdubbed the guitar, and I think it was 2 vocal tracks on that to get a little bit of harmony here and there. Yeah.
And I think the atmosphere is, apart from being dark, is quite beautiful. I was actually getting some sort of early King Crimson kind of vibes from it. Yeah. And I'm not sure if you were listening to stuff like that back in 72, I wonder.
Not specifically. I mean, I probably had heard some of their tracks, but again, I mean, none of the tracks or any of my music, for that reason, for that point of view, were inspired by any specific or type of music or any particular song or any particular style of playing. It was just me doing what I wanted to do.
But then the track changes midway, or a couple of minutes in, 2 minutes in or so, it becomes more of a space rock kind of track, I suppose.
Again, it was wanting to get into a jam so that we could play along the song, so that it reduced the necessity of having too many numbers to write and rehearse. So that was the idea of a lot of our instrumentals, just pad out the song to make the gig, fill out the gig. But they use that as a sort of a showcase. So in that song, the instrumental plays, and then you'll get a break, and the drummer will do a bit. You'll play again, another break. The bassist will do a bit, then I'll do a bit. Do a bit. So it's basically a way of just having a few bars of each of us showing ourselves.
Showing off. Yeah. And then RC8 comes, and we already talked a little bit about that. But that's the first track where I feel, because the other tracks we talked about musical styles, but RC8 is the first track that, or at least on the album, sounds a bit more bluesy. The other ones are not really bluesy at all, but there's a bit of a bluesy feeling too.
Bluesy, jazzy bass to it. Yeah.
and it's more a bit hard rock riffy as well somehow.
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
Yeah, Ron said he thinks that's the best riff that's ever been written, but that's his opinion. But I'm happy to go along with it.
Okay. and of course, then on the studio version here, 3 minutes in, something strange happened. Can you talk me through that? What happens in this track? 3 minutes in.
We're talking about the sound effect in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we didn't plan that at the in the writing of the song, but we'd already planned at the end. There's that sort of cacophony where we all go off at a tangent and play silly sort of notes. So we thought, well, let's just put something in so we show that we're not really taking ourselves too seriously. So I said, well, we got a break there. We got a bit of a break there. What can we put in there? And nobody could come up with anything. So I went off to the loo, to the toilet. Yeah. And the studio was a converted terraced house, and so the toilet was outside in a little shed. So I'd gone out while I was thinking about that to use the toilet, and I'd flushed the toilet, and I thought, oh, that's a good idea. What if we record that? We could slip that in the middle. So I went back in and told the guys, and they said, yeah, great idea, let's do that. So we recorded RC8 and left a gap in the middle, which you can hear on the backing tracks. Yeah. Intending to put that flush in at a later date after Allan had recorded it, which he did. He set up the mics, and I went and flushed it, and then he recorded it. But then we found out that the flush was actually a bit longer than the gap we'd left. So he said, well, we'll have to do something about that. And that was another story. He actually had to cut the master tape, take the gap out that we'd left, and then put the separate recording he made of the toilet flush in. But fortunately, he didn't tell me he was going to cut the master tape until after he'd done it. Otherwise, I think I would have been a bit horrified, knowing that he was actually going to cut the master tape. But it turned out very well. Yeah. So that's how.
I listened to the gap on the backing track part and compared, and as you say, it's not the same. So I was thinking maybe what happened there was that actually you played you missed something, or your playing broke down, and you just put that in to hide the fact that it was actually two different sessions spliced together. But that's not at all the fact.
It was all one session. RC8 was the only track we recorded in one take, the first take.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically, as I said, what you've got is a live recording with that flush spliced in, and then my vocal overdub. There's only one vocal overdub, so it's basically a live recording. Yeah. But no, it was all planned. Okay. No, it wasn't too spliced together. No, completely a complete plan there. That.
So then we have the cat, and I have to ask, even though this seems to be a love song, what's the cat in the cat? I mean, you're waiting for you to call inside your cat. I don't get it at all. Does it mean anything?
Well, yeah. She was going to the back door to call her cat inside the house. That's the reason.
Call inside. Oh, call. Okay, call. So, but it sounds like it's called inside your cat. Yeah. Okay.
I had to make the word scan and fit the actual track.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah. Okay. So it is a love song, and the woman has a cat. That's
yes, that's right. And I don't know because the girl on the cover of that LP, I did go out with at a time.
Oh, you did?
Not
okay.
At the time yeah, she was a girlfriend at one time, but not at the time I took the photo. So that the lyrics, although I don't know if she had a cat or not, the lyrics may have been inspired by the breakup of that relationship, but I've no idea now. I can't remember. But basically, it was just an idea of how to write a lyric into a sort of a story. So that's how that song came about. Although it changed slightly after Martin joined, because we didn't have the initial raucous solo that Martin puts in. It just started as sort of a bluesy type number. I can't remember if it had the soft solo in the middle, which I play, But it may have had all the solos in that song are played by Martin, apart from that middle laid back bit where I played the soft solo. And the idea behind that was that Martin's raucous solo tend to signify a cat when it's angry and hisses at you.
Okay.
But my solo in the middle tends to reflect on a cat when it's all friendly and purry and rubs up against you. So that's the idea behind those two different styles of guitar playing.
Okay. So that second, I think that's when, because that's when you have the sort of stretched out guitar tones as well, right? That's the more the purry cat. That's because I think about 2.5 minutes into the song, it shifts theme totally. There's a different theme inserted into the song there. So maybe that's the happy cat theme then, so to speak, that you have there, I suppose.
Yeah, it's only the solos that were put in with that idea, but whether the song reflects that as well, that would probably be accidental.
Yeah, I see. I was thinking about the vocals here again. So again, it's a kind of a different, it's sort of full-throated sort of vocal style, and also you're panning between, for some reason, the center channel and the left channel only. So you never go to the right channel. I don't know if that was intentional, because you're switching between.
That was the recording engineer did that. I wasn't aware that he'd actually done that until I heard the playback. So yeah, that was all Allan's idea doing that. Whether he obviously intended to do it, but he didn't ask me if it was okay. He did that, but it just made it slightly different. Yeah.
Okay. So then the final track on the album, Zero Time, that's also very dark, I would say, and that's a very jazzy kind of intro there. So speaking of different musical styles, that's the most jazzy piece on the album, I suppose.
Yeah, that
dark
was
and jazzy.
Probably about the last song I wrote, probably about the same time as The Cat, but it would have been one of the last songs I wrote with the album in mind. The lyrics came about at the end. The song came about pretty much as most of mine did. I'd just play about and I'd play some chords and I'd develop a melody, and the feel of the song without lyrics inspired me to write the lyrics as they are, because it's, as you say, it's a very dark and heavy, doom-laden sound to the actual music. So that inspired me to write the lyrics as they are now.
I was thinking about this sort of whooshing guitar sounds there. It's almost like a whiplash kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was again introduced fairly late, because that's Martin playing that, and he only joined us about a month before we went into the studio. So as we were rehearsing that, we didn't want to put too much pressure on him, because he had a very short time to learn all the tracks. So he didn't play on Dark Side at all for that reason, because it was the most intricate. And we said in Zero Time, well, look, don't worry about the music, just put something in that sounds good. So we started doing all these whiplashy sounds, and we said, oh, wow, that's great. Yeah, we'll keep that. Yeah, we'll do it like that. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. So interesting. So this album, which sounds very, I mean, it's well played and it seems very concentrated and cohesive, but actually two of the members joined fairly sort of just before, well fairly sort of, they hadn't been in the band for a very long time. So we were actually a new band in one sense, in that,
Well, we said, well, as regards being a four-piece, I said, Martin only joined about a month or so before. Ron had only joined probably the previous November, so he'd only been there about 6 months. So it was basically a new band,
And then I understand also that at this point in time, you paid for the recording and everything, and I read somewhere that maybe on your website that actually you were thinking that this is soon the end of the band, so I want to get us down on tape before it all breaks up. So you were kind of preparing for the end before you were going into the recording studio.
Any reason I recorded the album, because I knew we're going to be splitting up before long, and I didn't have any certainly of that lineup recorded. We unfortunately never did live recordings of that band, that lineup. And I thought, well, I'm so happy with how this has gone, and I put 4 years of my heart and soul into it since being at school. I thought I can't just finish and not have anything. So I want to record an album. And that's the only reason the album was made, because I wanted something to keep.
Yeah.
We obviously never thought any of this that's happened ever since would ever happen. Never crossed our minds. I think we probably said amongst ourselves, this is going to be a famous record one day, and then laughed.
Yeah.
But nobody ever thought that, not really.
No. But so I understand you did send a couple to record companies and stuff as well, and that's maybe how it was discovered in the end. But you didn't really try to promote the album in any serious way, because you were actually really planning on ending the whole thing anyway. So you were growing up, and people were going to go different ways.
Yeah.
So, that was so it's all preemptive nostalgia somehow. Preemptive nostalgia around them.
Yeah. I mean, that's not the reason we made the album, so we could hawk it around and try and get a deal. But just having done the album and having got finished copies, we thought, well, we might as well. We've got to lose. Let's see what happens. So we did send it around, but nothing really happened. No.
So then, but you did. So going back to the LP, so on the first LP, there's this jam session from '75, quite many years out, 3 years later. So what could you talk me through the intervening period a little bit there? What happened after you recorded the album then, and how did you end up doing a jam eventually?
Okay, well, after we'd recorded the album, we I think we did 2 or 3 more gigs, and we finished the very last gig we did with that lineup at that time was in November of '72. Then we all went our separate ways, but Ron and I kept playing together. I started to build a recording studio in the loft in my parents' house. So he came along once a week, once a fortnight, brought some of his compositions, and we'd just play and record them. And I got a 4-channel tape recorder by then, a TAC machine, and I got one of the Revox A77s from SIS after they closed down and started getting rid of all their equipment. So I was able to record fairly decent quality recordings of some of Ron's songs, most of Ron's songs, and some of mine. And then in November '75, I saw an advert for a 12-channel mixer at a reasonable price that I could just about manage to afford. So I thought, I'm going to buy that. So I drove over and bought that, brought it back, set it up with all my kit. So I've got a 12-channel mixer and a 4-channel Simulsync tape recorder and a 2-channel Revox machine. So I thought, I want to try this out, see what I can do with it. So I just got hold of a few mates. There was myself, obviously. There was Clive on drums. There was Ron. He was playing another 6-string guitar on that. And then I was in another band at the time, so I recruited him on bass guitar. And then also in that band was Bob Stryjek, who did a bit of playing with Dark, but not much. He came along and just bongoed about on the bongos. So I'd got the stereo image of the drums, the bass, and the bongos. And then I got myself on one channel and Ron on another channel. And then I just basically messed about with that stereo image on the back, and I just panned about the 2 guitars, myself and Ron, put a bit of echo in, and it's just basically to try out the kit. I mean, I wasn't doing it for any other reason than that, but it turned out fairly well, so I kept it. And then I worked out how to get that phasing effect. I'd sort of got a master tape on the TAC, so I copied that onto 2 channels of I got that on the Revox. I copied that onto 2 channels of the TAC, and again on the second 2 channels of the TAC. And as I was recording the second one, I used to just alter the speed of the tape by just touching the reel, so it'd go in and out of phase. So when I mixed those 2 down together, I could fade in the second track to get the phasing as I wanted it.
Yeah.
So that was the reason that track was recorded, just purely because I wanted to test out all the equipment I'd just bought, never intending it to ever hear the light of day outside of my studio in the loft. But things fell off for some extra tracks to put out after they did the first CD. So I said, well, I got this. Are you interested in that? I sent that to them, and they said, yeah, we'll bung that out. So I think they put it initially on an LP with another local band, Tarsus.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a split LP. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They put my track, the jam, split it over both sides, which I wasn't actually happy about at the time,
No.
but it's been done again, and it's all on one side now, so that's fine.
Yeah. Now it's a split LP with yourself on both sides. Yeah. So in that sense, it's better.
That's right. Well, yeah. Two bites of cherry.
So I think so at that stage, even though you did this recording, there was no plan to really sort of put Dark back together again. That was never in the cards. It was
no. As far as I was concerned at the time, it wasn't Dark. It was just myself with some friends, and two of those friends who have been in the last version of Dark. Yeah. So no, it wasn't a plan. There was no plan in recording that track, as I say, other than so I could test the equipment out.
Yeah.
And test my ability at being a recording engineer and mixing things together.
Yeah, I think there's a CD called Sessions After Dark as well. Is that is that after or from the intervening years? That's after 75.
Over that same period, probably from about 73 up till about 1977. That's when Ron got married and he moved out the area. So it was just getting together with Ron to record some of his compositions, record some of mine, just for our own amusement, just something to keep that we could to look back on and play.
Did you do that on the? Did you do that on the same equipment? Because actually, the sound quality, I think, on those recordings aren't necessarily as good as on the jam piece.
Some of it would have been before I got that equipment. It would have been just the TIAC and the Revox. And it would have been a case of, it might have just been two Revoxes now, come to think of it, I can't remember. But it would have been a case of Ron and I playing something that we'd be able to keep time to, then playing that back onto another tape recorder and overdubbing a couple of things, and playing it back again, overdubbing again and again and again. So you may have half a dozen or 8 overdubs. So you got quite an old generation of the initial tracks by the time you get the finished thing. So that is why you can discern a bit of a lack of quality in some of the tracks. But then some of them were done actually in the old SIS studio, because when they moved out, I transferred all my equipment from my mum and dad's loft and set it up in the premises that SIS used. And so I literally my proper little recording studio there, and it were able to get slightly better quality recordings in.
Oh, interesting. I forgot to ask one thing about the Dark. Final question about the Dark album. So you've written at length about these covers, the 64 that were made in 2 batches and all that. But one thing, there were 2 professional grade color photo gatefold covers done. Only 2. What happened to those? Do you still have them?
No, I sold them. Unfortunately, for a bit of a financial difficulty in the mid-90s, so I eventually ended up all my original copies. We got to this stage, I think, well, this can't carry on. This is going to bomb out now. We're not going to get any more. If I need to make some money, I better sell them now, unfortunately. But I mean, I've got cassette copies of so it wasn't as I was going to be out. I wouldn't have a copy of the original album at all. No. Still had the master tapes, not that I was playing, but no, I sold all mine. And those 2 that you're talking about, the colour ones, I did those for myself because I wanted slightly better quality photos. All the other ones I printed myself, and it was my first leap into colour printing, colour photography printing. So I was happy with them, but I wanted a professional quality printed photo. So I got them done at a local Kodak lab. And that's why those don't have the black borders. Because the ones I'm printing myself, I put the black borders on deliberately, dark around the edges.
Okay, so that's dark around the edges. Okay, fair enough. So then, if we skip to the final stage of this story, so out of the blue, someone calls you up and we're now in the 90s here, in 93 maybe, or I don't know when this happened first, when someone called you from the US and said, hey, we would like to
that was in 1990.
Yeah, 1990. Okay, 1990. Yeah. That was the first time that I mean, after the Dark, that was the first time that you heard anybody mention these records again, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a call. I mean, I think we'd all had phone calls, but
Mm-hmm.
before the others had calls, I got a call from Greg Breath, telling me that they'd got that somebody had found a copy of the album and they'd taken it back to the States and they'd made cassette copies and sent it all around to their friends, and they decided they needed to track us down and ask if they could release it again. Get it repressed again. So I agreed. Why wouldn't I? I think they asked me to send the master tapes over, but I didn't want to let the master tapes go. So I said, well, no, I'll get a record pressed from the master tapes here, and then I'll get them shipped over to you. So that's what I did. And they asked me to make the sleeves up. I mean, I couldn't do them exactly as I did the first lot. I couldn't afford to do it that way. And I don't think they would have paid that much for it anyway. So I just basically got 8x8 inch photos done and stuck them onto each side of a plain white sleeve. And there was no booklet with it. It was just a plain white sleeve with those photos stuck on. And the LPs, not with the original label, with an ordinary black on white label, just stating the obvious Dark on the Edges by Dark. So I sent them over to them, and that's how that transpired.
And then all the attention around that made you eventually reconvene as Dark again. Because this attention didn't die off. I mean, it continued sort of.
It
rolling.
did, yeah.
Yeah.
Much to our surprise, we kept getting offers to do a CD here, a CD there.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, why don't we get together and see if we've still got this sort of magic? And we were making a little bit of money. So by the time that came about, we thought, well, if we're going to get together, why don't we use the money we've got and record another album? So that's what we did. We got a message from my daughter. You might have seen that. So we got back together, used some of the songs that we'd already written, and wrote some new stuff. We met back in the studio in the mid-90s and recorded Anonymous Days, using the money that we'd got from relicensing the rights to Dark Round the Edges to other labels.
Yeah. So you I think you used some of the old stuff on this one too, but I'm not sure which are the old songs and which were new compositions actually on this one. I'm looking at it right now, the CD version.
There was the first track was one of my compositions. That was from the 70s. And I think also my second composition, Don't Worry About That, that was also from the 70s. Ron, the last track, Journey's End, that was one of Ron's. That was from the 70s. But I think the rest were all written in the mid-90s, specifically for the album. Although there was a couple of tracks, or 3 tracks based on Martin's compositions. They may have come from before that. I can't remember now. But basically, apart from the 3 tracks I mentioned, 2 of mine and 1 of Ron's, they were all written more or less specifically for the album in the mid-90s.
So what was it like to do dark kind of music in a modern studio instead of in this sort of relatively primitive studio that you had back in the day?
We thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Rather than trying to get everything done in one day, we spent a few days laying down the tracks. And of course, being a multi-track, if we weren't happy with something we did, instead of having to go back and always playing that whole track again, we could just correct that little bit on the one track. And so that was much more enjoyable doing it that way, because we didn't have to worry too much. Whereas with Dark Round the Edges, we were really pent up, hoping not to make a mistake halfway through, so that we'd have to go back and start again. So with Anonymous Days, a lot more reacted in the playing, and we could do a backing track, a guide track, and then we could put some more stuff in afterwards and replace bits we didn't like. So that was much better, yeah.
Do you think that changes the music?
Quite probably, yeah. It's probably not quite so spontaneous, but we'd done that. We wanted to try the new method. So yeah, that's why we enjoyed it. It was a different way of doing it compared with what we remembered from 20 years previously. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I realized that we have this 33 RPM single as the 14th album, but that's from 71 again, I suppose. That was
It
stuck on the end.
Those 2 tracks are from the SIS April 1970 session, which they also feature on the albums.
Yeah.
It's just something that Seelie Court wanted to do. They wanted to put a single out, and they chose those 2 tracks. Okay. I don't know why, because they're 2 of my more laid back compositions. Not that representative of the dark that was going around at the time. Maybe that's why they wanted to use those 2 tracks. I don't know. I just let them go ahead. I was happy with it. So
So that was just to have a single. I see. Yeah.
Well, it's a single, but it's 33 1/3 RPM as opposed to 40.
Because the tracks are too long for 45.
Certainly, they wouldn't fit on at 45. No.
That's great. So I realized we spent almost twice the time I said we were going to talk. So I'm sure you're getting exhausted from this by now. But we covered all the 14 albums at least.
Yeah, it's gone very, very fast. Yeah.
We spent almost 2 times 45 minutes here, actually.
Well, that's great. So, thank you for the chance.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, and I'll try to boil this down to something, and also contact the other members of the band and also the recording engineer a little bit, and see what I can sort of get together here. But I will also send you then the video files that we did here today, so that you can check if I managed to quote you correctly or not. I'm sure I will make a couple of mistakes, but normally I transcribe everything reasonably well. So a lot of work, I have to say. But if I have,
will we get a chance to actually see the article before it goes to print?
I'm not sure. I need to check when the deadline is, if there is an opportunity to do that. If there is time, I will certainly send it over to you so you can have a look at it, see that it makes factual mistakes.
Possible.
Yeah.
I mean, if I think of anything over the next couple of days that I'd want you to mention that I don't recall us talking about, I'll send you a quick email and suggest you could perhaps plot those bits in somewhere. But
sounds great. We can keep in touch over email. And as you know, I have this interview set up on Sunday. So if you feel like joining, feel free to. It's up to you. It's up to you. It's
I'll chase Clive up tonight, get him to check his email so he can get
That's
back to
great.
the rain stuff.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for talking to me. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.